I'm joined today by two Columbia University students. I'm going to introduce now William Morris and Rebecca Roscoe, and they're going to tell us a little bit about what brought them together and what brings them to TYT, because it's a movement, it's a protest, and it's also a series of demands at the same time. But it's rooted in kind of a real broad community, and we'll hear a little bit more about that later on. So, William, tell me a little bit about how it started and what it is.
Great. Yes, thank you so much for having us on today. So right now, there are more than 3,000 students at Columbia University who are supporting a tuition strike. And what this tuition strike demands is a series of demands. The first is a reduction in the cost of attendance during the pandemic by 10%, and also some demands from other student groups on campus for divestment from fossil fuels, divestments from companies that enable apartheid in Palestine, and also for Columbia to address its role in institutional racism in Harlem and among Black students at the school. And so in order to understand this movement and why there are 3,000 students who support this radical action, you have to understand that Columbia has repeatedly and consistently ignored the demands and needs of students throughout the entire year. This comes from different student movements with thousands of supporters who support these demands through things like hunger strikes and through an election in which students voted to have the university divest from companies enabling apartheid in Palestine. And all of these different student groups who we are partnering with for our demands have either met with the university and been ignored, or actually just been ignored altogether. And so you have this layer of student groups, but on top of this, and probably the catalyst for all of our demands, is the pandemic. And this is what is making people especially frustrated, is that in the spring, as Columbia transitioned to Zoom classes, more than 8,000 students supported the university moving to a lower cost of attendance during the pandemic. And Columbia ignored these students. And then throughout the summer, we saw other schools like Georgetown, Princeton, and William. They all reduced the cost of attendance during the pandemic by 10 to 15%. And Columbia stood by and did nothing. And perhaps the biggest slap in the face is that while students are struggling, while faculty are making sacrifices, Columbia's endowment has grown by more than $310 million this year. And Columbia's president, Lee Bollinger, has a $4.6 million salary. And unlike other college presidents, he's refused to take a pay cut during the pandemic.
As far as reducing the tuition, if Columbia came back and said, absolutely, we're going to reduce the tuition, would the strike end or would the strike continue? And I ask that because at a certain point, is it good to, I mean, it's never good to pay because paying sucks, but is it good to pay the tuition, and then once you're paying tuition, say that, hey, I have a stake in this game. I went to college at a very, very long time ago, it turns out, but apartheid was going on in South Africa, and people were building tents and staying on there and asking the University of Virginia, where I went to school, to pull money out of South Africa. It did work, right? But we were still paying tuition, albeit a lot less than you pay at Columbia. Tell me that, though. Is that going to be enough, at least to then give you a stake in the game?
And so here's the thing, is that once Columbia meets our demands, we're willing to go off strike. But the thing is that all of our demands are related, and it's not even really possible to meet this kind of structural demand in the cost of attendance without addressing these other areas. And so the way that we see this is that the reason that Columbia charges such a high rate is specifically because of its projects in Harlem and because of its investments. For example, we're not asking Columbia to materialize this money out of thin air. What we're asking Columbia to do is, instead of investing $6.3 billion in a new campus in Harlem that's displacing thousands of residents, we're asking Columbia to invest this money in its faculty and students. Because what we understand is that without the faculty and students that make up the university, this new campus and the new buildings are a bunch of empty buildings.
All right. So, Rebecca, let's move on to you. You're in Seattle. You're part of this. Tell me a little bit about now where things stand and how this is gaining traction, where it goes from here.
Yeah. So at this point, our movement has actually spread beyond just students, and we have support among alumni and among faculty and staff, and even elected officials have endorsed us. We've also been reached out to by student groups from all over the world who have been saying that they want to do something similar. Actually, this week we're planning to hold our first international town hall, and people have signed up from over 70 schools across 8 countries. It's really clear to us that these issues that we're calling out extend far beyond Columbia. Student debt is defining the kinds of lives that people in our generation are able to lead. And of course, it's even harder to accept the reality of rising tuition when it's being put toward racist policing, gentrification, investment in climate destruction, and companies that help maintain Israeli apartheid in Palestine. So this is why we've made the demands of our tuition strike for Columbia to address all of these issues, like Willem said. And we think that if we're successful, the tuition strike would be just one in a wave of strikes that are pushing back on the rising cost of college everywhere. And that's building pressure behind the national movement for student debt cancellation. And that's organizing students so that they can use this lever of power to bring about actual change on all these issues at institutions like Columbia that are perpetuating them.
Is there any, and I want to ask you about the policing, because that jumped out at me because we're talking about a university, but college police forces are an issue around the country now. Tell me a little bit about what your group and the associated others are addressing when it comes to policing, campus policing.
Yeah, and so again, all of our demands are tied together. And this campus in Manhattanville, the $6.3 billion campus, the way that Columbia is making this campus is that they have worked with the New York City Police Department to arrest citizens around this campus. For example, in 2010, once Columbia used eminent domain to secure this property that displaced thousands of residents, they started a massive 4-year, multi-million-dollar surveillance operation working with the New York City Police Department. And at the conclusion of this mass surveillance project, which they targeted the citizens living in public housing near the area, the New York City Police Department arrested 104 citizens in the same day. And so this is unacceptable to us. And this is, again, how our demands are tied together, because you have Columbia spending money on police, spending money on these new campuses in order to expand their real estate empire instead of focusing on the citizens. So once again, we're asking Columbia not to invest in police, but to invest in students and faculty, because that's what makes a university a university.
Rebecca, I want to ask you, what kind of opposition are you facing? And I'm not asking from the usual suspects. Are there student groups that are vocally opposed to this movement, either parts of it or all of it, that are mobilized themselves?
Yeah, well, the university has been pretty effective in using this narrative of budgetary crisis. And this has been to all of our confusion because, like Willem said, the endowment grew by $300 million last year, and tuition costs have been rising across most schools, and faculty have taken a hiring freeze, a salary freeze, and a cut to benefits. So it seems to us like the problem isn't that the university has a really tight budget, like some of the groups that are opposing us would say,
right,
but it's actually the same kind of austerity logic that we see so many institutions in the US relying on, that says that a crisis actually just means feeding off of the most vulnerable people so that the trustees or the investors at the top don't need to make any compromises.
How's it looking? I mean, from where you're sitting, are you optimistic that you're going to have an impact? At least they're going to come to the table and there may be a compromise. We'll start with you, Willem.
Yeah, we're very optimistic. And like I said before, the largest tuition strike before us was 200 students. We have 3,000 students already supporting the movement, and we have 6 more weeks to grow our demands. We are confident that not only are we going to have an impact, that we are going to be able to win all of our demands.
Yeah, like Willem said, I absolutely think that we're at a tipping point right now. And people are asking, if something isn't going to change now, when all of these issues have been so laid bare by the pandemic, then when will it?
And I have to ask this one more question. We'll be really quick. What if they call your bluff? Willem, what if they say, you know what? Sorry, tuition strike, goodbye. We're going to get someone else to fill your roster spot.
We wouldn't be that surprised if Columbia started to ignore its students, but we understand that we have the power to make Columbia address us, and we are going to hopefully move into other areas if we're unsuccessful, but we aren't going to stop until our demands are met.
You're both very smart, and if it doesn't work out at Columbia, we'd love to have you at the University of Virginia. By the way, I'll just put that out there. It's a great school. This is Will Morris. This is Rebecca Roscoe. They're both Columbia students, and they are both fighting for real change and trying to change the way universities operate, specifically Columbia, and get them to divest from places that these students believe that they shouldn't. Also, to try and lower their tuition. The town hall is this Thursday. Willem, Rebecca, thanks so much for being on the Young Turks.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.